have the time to listen to me grind. Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once. I am one of those.
Hey, welcome back to The Grind. My name's Peter Howard at Pahowdy on Twitter. I write for Dynasty League Football. I do player projections for playerprofiler.com. I nearly forgot who I was. Welcome to The Grind. Don't really care what your grind is, whether you grind tape, whether you grind film, whether you grind both, whether you grind articles, whether you grind, points for one-hand catch leagues. I'm glad to have you here. I'm just showing a little bit of what my grind is. I do a Patreon-only podcast once a week, literally going through my process or answering a question that they do. But I want to make more YouTube content, because it also seems like a fun way to get involved in some of this fun that we have for fantasy football. So I'm doing this too. I want to talk about wide receiver busts, how easy they are to spot, especially when you have draft capital and production in mind, and maybe show a little bit of the 2020 class, but I really think I'm going to break that down for my Patreon, so that's going to be their next grind. So I recently heard, and it's recently been said, and it's been said a lot actually, most things have been for a while, that the combine doesn't matter. I may have started the hashtag. And it's true. Most people want to point out when they go that way that as long as you address draft capital, and Scott Barrett said it recently very well. And that's true, but that still doesn't mean that busts aren't easier to spot. Just because a player gets drafted in the first round doesn't mean I want him higher than most people, so I'm going to reach for him or trade for him or anything else. And that's what I mean by bust. You get to a certain point in the draft, take what you want. Even in the first round, you can take what you want. But we are getting dangerously close. I would say I am right on the edge of tipping over from reasonable human being to take season, where the safety belts are going to come off people. I'm going to stop reminding you that you don't have to sell Terry McLaurin, and I'm going to start telling you that you really have to sell Terry McLaurin. His ceiling isn't quite... He might not have hit his ceiling yet. I said it. So... I guess I'm still not quite there yet, but I'm getting pretty close, and the closer I get to locking in my pre-draft wide receiver ranks, the closer I am to it. After this, I'm going to start adding in my running back data and really start grinding on those ranks too, and tight ends, quarterbacks. Quarterbacks pretty much set. I don't do much with quarterbacks. All right, so rookie wide receiver busts. How you spot them, how it's really easy, consistent, and how it failed in 2019 so far. It's part of the take season thing. All right. I don't know how much of my stuff you've seen, but I'm a big fan of college production. I want to post those crappy little graphs about how some players produce over the average and some people produce under the average of expectation, and the ones that produce over are typically good in the NFL, and the ones that are under are typically bad. But rookie busts, especially at wide receiver, typically break down into two categories. There are different things you look for, though, depending on what type of profile you're looking for. And that's kind of what I want to show in this video. I'm going to try and get it to 10 minutes. Said it mostly to remind myself, because I kind of get long-winded. So, a wide receiver can have an early or late breakout age. Let's just break it down into those two categories. If you break out at age 18 or 19, you have an early breakout age. If you break out after that, at age 20, 21, 22, 23, 27, at one point, I profiled a guy who broke out at 27. I don't know. Might have had the date wrong. So, most, especially bust candidates, look like players with high draft capital and late breakout ages. And this isn't, like most analysis that gives you something so clear and evident, when you actually look at it, it gets messy. This is really pretty true. If a player's going to bust, he mostly has a late breakout age compared to his draft capital. Let me show you a little bit what I mean. That's going to be easier. Alright, so this is my wide receiver database, pinned to my Twitter timeline. You have it if you want it. It's free. So if we, limit to players who've never had a top 36 season, so complete busts, and, give all the players 3 years to break out, so we're only interested in rookies between 2003 and 2017, 17, 18, 19, right, cool. And then we'll limit by first round draft picks. So these are players with draft capital. If everyone's drafted in the first round, what do busts and what do hits look like? I think that's the way I'm going to go about it. Well, the first thing you see, and this is what goes on with my tables and graphs and stuff like that, is pretty much everyone. How many we've got? First round busts, complete busts. 20 prospects that were drafted in the first round, so they had draft capital, right? They've got the thing, and yet 20 of them never had a top 36 season. Now, each of these players you can dig into, and you can find it unfair to judge them based on production, right? They had injury issues, they had this, they had that, they had a sick family member. I get it, but when something's so consistent in so many different samples, you've just got to believe there's some truth under it, no matter what their personal story was. Or at least if you're trying to highlight more or less likely players to bust and not bust, right? All right. So you can judge a breakout age by a 20% threshold or a 30% threshold. I've always used 20, but 30 is the recent push, and it is slightly more accurate, but I think you lose some players, like Doug Baldwin, for example, if you go to that higher threshold. So I'm just going to stick with the lower threshold right now. What's true in the lower threshold should be true in the higher threshold, so it's probably the best way to do it. If you look at players with early breakout ages, how I define them, you find 6 players that busted, never had a top 36 season in the NFL within the third 3 years or ever so far for some of them, like Philip Dorsett, with first round draft capital. Now, Philip Dorsett didn't fool anyone, no matter what your grind is, whether you like film, whether you like tape, whether you like both, whatever, whether you grind dishes and, divine from the stars, I don't care. I don't think it really fooled anyone. But it was really easy to get him out of the young breakout age category just by looking pretty much any stat and comparing it to anyone else. Philip Dorsett's drafted in the first round for a reason. He's got a lot of talent, he's got a lot of skills. Patriots got a lot out of him while he's been on that team. So this isn't shaded on the player. We're looking for purely fantasy assets. That's worth keeping in mind as well. So an easy way to look at it would be like average dominator rating. College dominator ratings listed right here. That's the average of the best and last years. I prefer average dominator because I prefer adjusting for when a player produced. And average does that a little bit, and it's an easy way of getting to it. So average dominator rating, you can see he scored a 16.5. Most wide receivers who break out actually have like a 33% dominator or above. That's the average, or somewhere around there. And even just compared to these other busts that were drafted in the first round, you can see that his average performance was incredibly low. So even with a young breakout age, like, we weren't fooled, neither was anyone else, but it means there's only really 5 that a young breakout age could have scared us on, right? These young breakouts didn't break out when they got to an NFL. Dig a little further and you find Mike Williams. He's the one my model likes the best out of these 6 busts. He's got a really interesting story. It takes me about 10 minutes to say it. Really suggest you Google it. Mike Williams 2005 though, not 2010 or 2017 or the other Mike Williamses. A running back won a court case to go to the NFL because he was suspended. Mike Williams took the opportunity to win his own court case so he could declare as a sophomore, so he went after only 2 years of college. Hasn't happened before, hasn't happened since. He showed some promise, but let's just say flat out bust. There were some injury issues too as well, but like, everyone's got a story, right? So that's typically what, like, I think that's kind of unusual as well. Maybe that extra year would have given him more experience, better draft landing spot, who knows, but it didn't work out for him. Troy Williams is the other one, however, that I will very clearly take out of the young breakout age hit rate category because he fits one of my tropes. If you're looking at young breakout ages, there are things called model confusers, or I call them model confusers, where there's something about the way their projection fell that their averages and their stats are just looking good to a model or an average, but actually aren't. And if you look at his season, you notice they had 3 solid dominator rated seasons at age 19 or 21, but I always adjust for games played after doing the dominator calculation. You see, no, that's touchdown speed. Okay, you see he only played 6 games in his age 19 season, so his stats are kind of suspect and removed from my age-adjusted dominator rating. And if you go over to the 2 seasons where he played a significant number of time, he has 1 good year and 1 bad year, which means his average is working out close to the average based on age-adjusted dominator, and that's confusing the model. So he's got a young breakout age, but I really think he's a phony one, and that takes us to 4. But even if not, you've got 6 wide receiver busts out of 20 since 2003. All of them happened, and let's, Philip Dorsett is a fine exception. All of them happened before 2011. 2 of them happened in the 2014 class. Okay, it's not a common occurrence. Whereas on the other hand, if you look at those late breakout categories, 20, 21, 22, that's where you find all the busts. John Ross, Corey Coleman, Will Fuller, Josh Doxson, Laquan Treadwell. Well, you can see them. You can see them right there. I'm on the right page. Now, one caveat here. Will Fuller, I really liked him. He comes out really well in my model, and he came out really well in my model in his draft year. I wanted to draft Will Fuller. I think it's unfair to call him a bust, because I think while he's been healthy, we have definitely seen he's had more potential than that. He's scored a lot more fantasy points than Mike Williams, for example, 2005 version. However, I'm allowing it in because by limiting to only top 36 seasons, we also don't have to talk about Corey Davis, who's also a young breakout player with an age 18 breakout age who hasn't had a top 24 season yet. So it's 1 for 1. Okay, I'll allow it. But I think it's kind of unlikely. It does bring up that age 20 breakout age, by the way. And based on the statistics I've ran and the graphs I've posted, breaking out at age 20 is fine. It's like not concerning. 21, 22 or never breaking out, pretty much always a bust. Always a bust apart from one example, which is Kelvin Benjamin. Enjoy that hit. But 20 is fine, but we include it there because it means in the later breakout category, because it means the profile needs to be looked at more closely. Are they model confusers, or are they late breakout players? So those are my 2 tropes. We've got 2 different categories, late and early breakout, and then the trope is if you're your average looks weird because he didn't play enough years, then you have to go look at those years and see if he was always above average or always below average or one good season, one bad, like Troy Williamson. Or the other type of bust outside of a late breakout player is a late breakout production player. Or I think of them as peak producers, players that peaked right at the end of their college career. Will Fuller didn't do that. That's why my model liked him. Whereas if you look at Corey Coleman, and we skip over to and again, you just have to slide to the right. It's not like they're hard stats to find. Age-adjusted dominator that I call dope for my man, Homer Simpson. It's not catching on, but I like it. It's age-adjusted dominator, okay? Then you see pretty much everyone in this category with this age 20 breakout year had a late or a peak production at the end of their college career. Now, it's important to note that these players also played earlier. Like, there are a few exceptions, something I call the Calvin Ridley rule, where if a player doesn't play until they're 20 years old and breaks out at 20, it's unfair to ding them for not having broken out earlier, right? And that saves you from fearing Kenny Golladay, it saves you from fearing Calvin Ridley, AJ Green, pretty much all the ones that could be considered 20-year-old breakouts who then hit in the NFL with decent draft capital. Will Fuller, I really think he would hit if he could stay healthy, which he hasn't. Injury concern is a whole other evaluation, right? And we tend to be aware of it before they came in, much like with John Ross. So you see with Will Fuller, the only year he played before 20, he only got in 6 games. So again, that's something that I check when I'm breaking down and looking for potential busts in the first round, second round, third round, every round. I want to see their breakout age, find out what kind of profile I'm looking at. Then I want to go look at their years, how they compare to the average, how many years were they over, did they do it younger, and did they play enough games early that I can really criticize them for not breaking out younger. And if they didn't, then it's neutral, right? You just accept the draft capital. At least. You can do a little more analysis. We're just thinking about identifying potential busts. Just, does this player look like a John Ross? Does this player look like a Kevin White? So out of those 20 busts, 14 of them all had late breakout ages. I can only really make excuses for one. Based on the production, this is the only guy in my model, well, apart from one other, that he liked. Of the 17 that weren't young breakout ages. The rest, we didn't have to waste draft capital on. So great. The other guy I want to talk to you about here is AJ Jenkins. He's the perennial wide receiver bust in the first round. It's a fun rabbit hole to fall down if you ever get the chance to. You can still read articles based on people still writing now, naming no names, talking about how he's having a slow season and how Stephen Hill's probably going to be the real good pick. Neither of them broke out. And it's kind of fun to fall down that rabbit hole. Really, no one has a good explanation. He just wasn't good. He Laquan Treadwell, actually, in that he never really earned time to get on the field, let alone didn't do enough while he was on the field. So that's a perfect bust. Perennial bust. And everything on his profile, production-wise, would have fooled me. None of the numbers I've created, age-adjusted production, breakout age, average dominator, receiving yards per team pass attempt, all of it looked good. So there's no way I can tell you that player that looks good in my model isn't AJ Jenkins. He's a perennial exception. Okay, but if we go look at his draft class just for a second, because I'm trying to get this down to a decent length video for you all. Go look at the 2012 season. This is organized by Draft Capital right now, by the way. So this is the order that we drafted in. What you can also see is in that year, T.Y. Hilton is a wide receiver I wanted the most, or my model wants the most. He has the best age-adjusted production and the best age-adjusted efficiency. It's not age-adjusted. Well, it kind of is age-adjusted, but anyway. An efficiency score that they've just started created. So this is a guy that sticks out, and he's in the 3rd round. So draft capital is everything, but I also want to assess by that draft capital who looks like a bust and who looks like an extreme value based on how productive they were in college. And that's the first part of the process I'll go through. Like, I also want to check out what film grinders say. I also want to check out what other type of grinders say. I want to get as much context as possible. But it's when did they break out? That gives me an idea of what type of profile I'm looking for. And then I look for these tropes. Are they a peak producer? Are they a model confuser in the young breakout age categories? And then I still always have to accept it could be AJ Jenkins, to be fair. So I pay attention to draft capital for that reason. And that saved me on Michael Thomas, the good Michael Thomas, the actual good Michael Thomas, because he was drafted to a good situation, had good film reviews, played the right type of role, had Drew Brees, had draft capital. He was actually an underproducer, which is the other kind of potential wide receiver bust in any round. That's the Philip Dorsetts of the world. Players that just never quite... They break out in terms of having 20% of their team's college production, so they have a breakout age. But outside of that, they don't produce in any year like successful NFL wide receivers. And that's what age-adjusted production, or the DOE rating, is meant to show. You have to get over at least one of them. And if it's only 1 year at the very end of their college career, that's a peak producer or a late breakout. And if it's always under the average, that's an underproducer. That's a Philip Dorsett. And that's the other type of bust I try to identify. Peak producers, late breakouts, and underproducers. And it doesn't really matter what breakout age you have. If you're an underproducer, my pre-draft model doesn't like you, and I tend to be concerned that they're going to be busts in the NFL. So, as we look at the 2020 class and everyone's feeding in combine data, that's the process I'm going to go through to start looking for who is more or less likely a wide receiver bust. We don't have draft for capital yet. That's the major and most interesting and most useful for sorting these wide receivers to see who we should reach on and who we should not reach on based on roughly where they're going to get drafted in our rookie ADP. First round wide receivers should go first, obviously. And that's the stage. That's I realize I never articulated my bust meter that I've been using in my head. Do they look like a bust? Do they look like not a bust? It's not just a model. The model isn't a ranking system. It's meant to help me order it and conceptualize their production. If you ever do look at my database, my pre-draft model as a basic guide, over 9 points is excellent. It's great. And my model really likes them. Over 8 is really good. Definitely like that player. Let's see how everything else shakes out. Over 7 is really interesting. Over 6 is... okay, that's just kind of one of the crowd. There's a range, right? Just as a basic tiered system, it's 7, 8, 9, and above is good. To look at the 2020 class, just briefly, we've got 2 players hitting over 9, so the really great production range. We already know the concerns on Tyler Johnson. We know draft capital is going to adjust him enough for me that, I might be picking him up off the waiver wire for my taxi squads at this point, so we don't have to worry so much that his production looks really high, even though all the other context, the tape reviews, the lack of combine isn't there, because draft capital is definitely going to adjust that for me. Justin Jefferson, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Antonio Golden Gandy, and Quintus Cephas all score an 8, so good production. Just real quick, Quintus Cyphers definitely looks like a model confuser. Not very interested in him, but that's a surprise to no one. Like, we all pretty much know the names at this point, right? Justin Jefferson looks really interesting. I do think I was talking about him with Zach Reed and Dynasty, from the Dynasty Dummies on my podcast, the Dynasty Crossroads. I think he looks like a really interesting player. Like, my model likes him third best. I can clearly find no faults in his profile. He's got an age 19 breakout age. Overall looks really impressive. He was a little under efficient. But based on talking with Zach Reed and knowing that he played as a 2 on his own offense, that speaks more to the type of role he can play in the NFL. So I think landing spot's going to be really important for Justin Jefferson in my post-draft ranks. KJ Hamler, it's got more speed than anything else, but so did T.Y. Hilton. Really efficient, great producer, or good producer. His average is 29% dominator. It's okay. But he did have an early breakout age. I can find no real red flags. He didn't perform on the combine, so I can't really assess what type of physical traits he might bring to an NFL offense. He really only played in 2 years, but both of them were interesting enough that I'm not going to call him a model confuser. Like, his good year was at age 19. His age 20 season was right on the average, so it's fine. That's actually pretty good. So I like him a lot. Jerry Jeudy, I'm adjusting a little bit because of all the noise about the Alabama situation. I'm just trusting that. And again, his one good year, according to age-adjusted production, was under the age of 20. So, okay, I can believe Jerry Jeudy. He's probably going to easily end up as my third wide receiver right now off the top of my head. Jalen Reagor is the guy I like the best. My model doesn't like him so much because his average in his last year are slightly low because he had this last year dip. But so did players like Chris Godwin. They fell in terms of production compared to good players in their last year. So I'm not overly concerned with that. But again, his average efficiency is a little low compared to most first-round wide receiver breakouts if he gets first-round draft capital. So I'm concerned about him, but he's a physical monster. He's got all the production in the world. Him and CD Lamb, really, I don't think anyone can move them from 1 or 2, except maybe extreme draft capital unexpected events. And those are the guys I said that scored 8, right? I think that's enough for now, so I can get out here. Like, I really like Denzel Mims. You can see he's very next up. This is interesting production. And T. Higgins. I think Brandon Ayuk looks like... he looks like a late producer with an age 21 breakout. And when I look at his actual career, like, I want to believe it. I don't. If he gets significant draft capital, I'm probably going to be low on him. Brian Edwards, I absolutely love, but I don't have time to go into why exactly. He produced well, young breakout age. Depending on his draft capital, I'm going to be higher on him than most people, I really think. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here. That's the process I go through. You can look through my database and do it yourselves, or just, move stuff around, do whatever you want with it. Just make a copy, and you can have all the production data for rookie wide receivers since 2003 that you want. I'm off to go insert running back 40 times into my database, I guess, so I can start grading on them. Thanks again. Really appreciate checking out the video. Check out the Dynasty Crossroads podcast if you want. Find me on Twitter at Pahowdy. Hit me with comments, questions there below in this video or on Twitter. Thanks very much. Bye.
Do you have the time to